Hi, so we're ready for another lesson in watercolor painting, and this time I think I shall show you how I paint spruce trees. Spruce trees, what are they? Well, another name for spruce trees is Christmas trees. And I've been out and about and photographing some Christmas trees. So here you've got an example of a Christmas tree. It's on the edge of a plantation. It's quite a nice tree. It's well built up. It's yeah, one can see how it's built up, and that is important, that you know how these things that you're going to paint are built up. If you've never seen a Christmas tree and you want to paint a Christmas tree, then you've got a bit of a problem. But if you've seen one and looked at it and studied it and see where the stem is and where the branches are and how they are built up and where are the more branches and fewer branches and things like that, then it's quite easy to paint a Christmas tree. But before I start painting it, I think I shall draw it with a pencil, because it's much easier to find out how things hang together by drawing it first with a pencil, and then by the side of it I'll show you how I paint it. When I start drawing such a tree, the first thing I decide is how tall the tree is. You'll find out in a minute why I do this, but I put two pencil marks here, and I decide my tree is going to be as high as the area between the 2 points here. Then I start by drawing the stem of the tree trunk, which is very, very thin for such a little tree, from the top down. And I don't draw it all the way down. You'll see why in a minute. When I look at the tree, I can see it's got some small branches right at the top, and they sort of go from the tree trunk, from the stem, out towards the sides. Another thing which you will notice on a Christmas tree is that the branches are sort of bunched in areas. I mean, they are in layers. I mean, you've got one layer here with 5 or 6 small branches, and they've got another one here and here and here. And further down you go, so of course the branches will get longer from the stem, go further away from the stem. And when you get to about here, you will notice that you cannot see the stem anymore, because there are so many branches now that the whole thing covers over the stem, and that disappears in all these branches, which again are getting longer and longer the further down the tree you go. In the end they can be quite long at the bottom here, and in the middle here, where you expect to see the stem, the tree trunk, it disappears. So this is a spruce or a Christmas tree. But there is another little thing which I want to explain to you, and that is when I've drawn it once with this tone of pencil, then I start drawing it again with an even darker tone. What I'm trying to do here is to make it much darker in the middle, because that is here, in this area here, where you're looking through most branches, and you cannot see out in the edges here. Perhaps they're a bit lighter because there is not quite so many branches here, but in the middle here there are a lot of branches here, and also some of the smaller branches up at the top can also be made a little bit darker. And in this way you produce a depth in the tree. The light branches out in the side here, they seem to be further back in the tree, and the darker ones here, they seem to come much more forward, and you get a depth in the tree. And this principle I will also use when I start painting my tree with watercolor. To paint the Christmas tree, I use 2 brushes. I have a rigger brush, which is a number 2 rigger brush, which gives me some very thin lines, lines easy to control. And then I have a round number 12 brush here, which gives me quite a thick line where I can fill in the tree with colour. The colour which I'm going to use is a dark green, and in the paints that I've got Payne's grey here, I've got the bluish Payne's grey here, and I've got a cadmium yellow, and these are the two colours I'm going to mix to get the colour for the Christmas tree. Okay, so I start with a little bit of Payne's grey, put it onto here, and then I take a little bit of cadmium yellow and mix it in, and that gives me a dark green colour. Perhaps I shouldn't make it all that dark at the moment, because I'm going to paint the tree twice, and the next time I'm going to paint is going to be even darker than this colour, so I've got to be careful that I don't paint it too dark from the start. The next thing will be to take my paper and my pencil and to just put 2 marks on it so I know how high this tree is going to be. Then I start with my rigger brush. Okay, I take my rigger brush, fill it up with the paint, and I go to the top mark, and I make a stem for my tree. And then I start painting the small branches from the sides. Perhaps this could be a little bit longer here. Okay, the further down the tree I go, the further go the branches from the tree, and then when I get to around here, the whole thing falls completely together, and I take my bigger brush now, looks like I have to make a little bit more paint, and start painting the tree with some bigger, broader strokes. The important thing here is that it's out at the edges here that I also show some of the spikes of the tree. Okay. And this is the tree painted the first time. Now I will let this painting dry. I can use a hairdryer here. You can see here when I use a hairdryer that the paint becomes lighter, and this is a thing that everybody who paints watercolour finds out after a time, that wet watercolour is quite deep in colour, and when it dries it becomes lighter. So I knew it will become lighter, so now I can mix an even darker colour and then paint it onto this. And I start again with my rigger brush. I take the rigger brush again, start with that, because I go to the top of the tree and paint a few extra darker branches here. And you can see that if I can still see some of the lighter branches and paint some of the darker branches, then I'm beginning to get a little bit of depth in my tree. Then when I come here, I continue with the dark colour. I paint some of the branches which I mean are further forward in the tree, but I still leave some of the lighter branches which I painted before. And in this way I sort of get two colours on top of each other, and hopefully my tree ends up with a little bit of depth. What I want to do now is to paint another tree by the side of this first one, still with the same colour, strength of colour which I used for the first tree here. So I get a dark tree here, and standing by the side of the first one, here the two trees run into each other, so they the two colours can merge here. Okay, perhaps the second tree is a little bit smaller than the first, and perhaps one more just to illustrate this effect, because you will see this is just halfway through the painting. I'll paint another little tree here, also with the same strength of colour. It doesn't really matter if you get all these spikes sticking out of the tree. If it looks good, then it's all right. Now I'm going to let these two trees dry with a hairdryer here. And now I paint them as I did with the first tree, a little bit darker. Now they are dry, so I can get another layer of paint on. This is to get the depth into the trees. Just to make them come, the darker colour here makes the foliage come forward. But now the interesting thing is, watercolour is a medium which is very good at painting things in mist and fog and things like that. So now if I now take this colour which I just used and water it down a bit until I get a very light colour, then I can use this colour for the trees that are standing in the background. And these trees are only painted once. So you shouldn't go around and painting them 2 or 3 times and building the strength of the colour up. They've got to be painted just once, because they've got to go into the background of this painting here. And you can see, because these trees are standing behind the ones in the front, so you don't have to paint so much. That is this one. This is the really good thing about it. You can paint these trees very, very quickly. They are standing in the background and they are just a shadow of a tree. And the effect of these very thin trees, or rather trees painted with very thin paint, and the trees painted with the stronger paint, gives a very nice effect of depth in a Christmas tree forest or a spruce forest or whatever you want to call it. So this is one way of painting Christmas trees. Okay, now I've shown you how to paint one and then another one and another one. But in a minute I shall show you another way of painting a lot of Christmas trees in one go. While I've got your attention here, I would like to tell you about my ebook. If you're interested in learning a few more techniques, watercolor techniques, and you like the way I present things and teach things, then you could go to my website. The address will come here in a minute, and you can have a look at my ebook. You can't see the whole thing, of course. You can just see a few of the things which are on the ebook. The book contains 22 chapters, 23 chapters, and they concern themselves with water and the sea and landscapes and buildings and things like that. And they cost, the book costs €12, $13. One pays by PayPal, and I send the book by mail. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more, especially from me, go in for my homepage and have a look at some of the chapters, and then decide if you want to buy it. But now we're going to continue a little bit with this lection here. Another way of painting a group of trees. The whole thing started when I wanted to paint this painting here. It's a scene from the island where I live, and here in this area there was a group of Christmas trees or spruce trees. They're a little bit larger than ordinary Christmas trees, but that doesn't matter. And I'll just show you another way of painting a group of trees. I've just shown you how to paint one tree and then another tree and a third tree and a fourth tree. But if you wanted to paint it even quicker than that, then I'll show you how to paint a lot of trees quite quickly. The first thing here is to mix my colour again. And I use the same colour as I used before, which is Payne's Grey and a little bit of cadmium yellow. This gives me a dark green. My Payne's Grey has a little bit of blue in it. It's the bluish type of Payne's Grey. You can also get one which is quite black, but that doesn't give you a very nice green colour. So I always use the Payne's Grey with a little bit of blue in it. When I've got this mixture on my palette here, then I go over to my paper and I paint a big clump, a big area here. With this wet paint. And while it is still wet, here you've got to work quite quickly. While it is still wet, I start painting some of the tree trunks. But it is important here that the bottom of the trees always disappear into this mess of wet paint here. Otherwise you're going to end up with something which looks like some trees standing on top of a hill. These trees here are supposed to be part of the hill, so at the bottom of these trees you've got to make sure that they disappear into all this here, and because it is still wet it's quite easy to get them to merge with the wet colour here at the bottom. Okay. You paint the trees, the branches of the trees, and then you get the whole thing to run into the bottom of into this wet area full of colour here. And I mean, how precise have these branches got to be? They don't have to be very precise at all. And I start by using this colour which I have mixed up. When I have got enough of my dark trees here, then I can get my paint to be more diluted, so I get the weaker colour, and then I can start painting the weaker trees in between the darker trees. This. And of course when I get down to this area here, then I stop. See here now, this has dried a little bit too much. Now I've got to try and dissolve it a bit, but that's all right. Perhaps get another high tree here. Again, painted with a weak colour, so it looks as if it's going into the distance. When this area is dry, and I can dry it very quickly with a hair dryer. At the moment it looks like this. You can see I've got some trees in the foreground, I've got some trees in the background, and now that the whole area is dry, I can augment it a little bit. I can paint a little bit more on the trees that are supposed to be in the front and leave the ones at the back as they are. So I go back to my rigger brush and have a little bit of this darker colour again, and now I go back to some of the trees in the front and paint a few more branches on them, so that it looks as if these trees come even more forward. And at the bottom again, I get them to run into the other colours here. So, for example, this tree here as well could have a little bit more paint on it. And when I get down to the bottom here, I just get the whole thing to run together. If I want to have an extra tree here somewhere, I can also paint an extra Christmas tree, spruce tree, so it looks as if it's coming, so it's standing right at the front of this area here. And perhaps another one. So here I would choose an area which is quite light and dry. It is important that it's dry, so I'll make sure that this is dry. So I could, for example, get another tree here. Get another tree there. So just one more, just for luck. This area here is dry. So perhaps a little tree here. And this will be part of a painting perhaps, but it was painted not one tree at a time, but a lot of trees at a time. Okay, I can see that this perhaps needs a little bit more here. Oh, here I just crossed some brush strokes, so it looks as if there are some. But it is, so it looks as if there are some branches on this. But it is important that when you get to the bottom, the tree doesn't just stop, it fades into the other colours. Okay, so this was another way of painting a group of spruce trees, as if it were a little forest, a little collection of trees on top of a hill or something like that. Okay, we're going to look at one more thing, and this is going to be the last exercise in this little film. The last exercise is to show you how to paint a forest. I mean, this here is an area which is covered completely by spruce trees, large old Christmas trees. So many of them here in this area that you can't actually see individual trees. They all run into each other here. An area which is a little bit closer. So there are some trees here which you can see. But the important thing with painting this area here is that I have to have a wet sky to paint these trees into. So I'm going to show you how I do that. The only thing I draw on my paper is the horizon. That is the line where the trees are standing on. Everything else will be painted. I have already prepared my paints. I'm going to have a blue sky, ultramarine blue. I'm going to have it there, and this is the color for my trees. So that is already ready on my palette. The first thing I've got to do is to wet my sky and paint it. And I paint my sky all the way down to this line here, because the trees are going to be painted onto the wet sky. And you'll see what will happen when they are painted onto the wet sky. So I've got my water here, and I just wet my brush and wet the paper. Okay, I don't wet it 100%. I just paint some stripes onto the paper here. And then I take my blue color and I paint some color onto it. I go all the way down to the horizon. If some of the lines here are a little bit too sharp, then I just wet them a little bit and the color runs. We can see here, I have now wetted my area all the way down to the horizon here. Now I take the color for my trees and I start here. So paint this area here. That is where I'm going to have the low trees, and then I go over to this area here. That's the area where I'm going to have the high trees. I start by painting things like that. Then I go over to my rigger brush and I start painting some of the treetops here. Okay, because this area is still wet, then you can see what's happening. It is difficult to paint a sharp tree, but I'm just getting some treetops coming out of the colour here. Here, of course, the whole colour runs together. Oops, that was a little bit too big. Oh, that's okay. That's okay. And this area will dry now. This area will also dry. What I was hoping that would happen, that some of this colour would get drawn up by the wet sky. It's getting drawn up a little bit up here. The bigger trees here, they look all right here. And now I've got to let this dry. And here you don't use a hairdryer. If you're painting wet into wet, do not use a hairdryer. If you use a hairdryer, you just blow all the pigment around, and things dry unevenly and things like that, so you get a lot of problems. So something like this has to dry in the natural way. Let this dry. It'll take a couple of minutes and then it'll be dry. Then I'll be able to come back and show you what I will do here. When I'm sure that this area here is dry, I take my rigger pencil, go into the paint that I've got lying on my palette here, and paint some very small treetops at the edge of this forest here. But when I come further in, there's another way of doing this. I just use my brush by scobbing it up and down here. You can see what happens here. So I place the brush on the paper like this, and I just push it up and down. And because the paper is rough, because I'm using rough paper here, then I'm getting these treetops here. And well, I mean, these trees here are very far away from me, so you're not going to see any details on them. I can continue in the same way over these trees here. But now I can use some larger brush strokes. And I can also go over to some more paint here. And again, I can do some of the as we did before, paint some of the trees again. But now we've got in the background, we've got some lighter trees, and that will give us the depth between the foreground and the background. Okay, so again, and remember, when you're painting a lot of trees that's standing side by side, never paint them the same heights. And some trees will be lower, some trees will be higher. Variation is the key word here. So you try to vary things as much as possible. Now I've had a high tree, low tree, then I'll get another tree which is a little bit higher here. And you can see you don't really need to have these trees perfect or precise. There's so much chaos in these brush strokes here that they actually look quite natural. So don't worry. I mean, I know people when they start painting, they have to paint everything so precise because otherwise nobody's going to be able to recognize what they're painting. But when one's gone through that phase, and it takes a few years, then you'll end up by compromising, painting things quickly so they start looking better. And again, at the bottom, if I want to get rid of this open area here, then I just put more and more color at the bottom. Okay. I'll just continue with more and more trees, or treetops rather. Sometimes they run into each other and disappear, other times they stay as sharp trees. And it's important that you've also that you do not paint over the first trees that came from the wet and wet part of the painting. So you still got to be able to see those trees in between. So this is the third exercise that I can show you. And you can see it didn't take very long to paint this, but that's because it is very approximate. It's nothing which, oops, perhaps I shouldn't be doing this making this too dark, but you can see the way I'm using the brush here, I'm scubbing it up and down, and because the paper is rough, then it gives me that effect. I'll do it again here. I use this little rigger brush quite a lot for creating structure and that sort of thing in my paintings. Well, that's the end of this lesson, how to paint Christmas trees, either individually or in groups, in forests, and I hope you've learned something you didn't know before. And of course, practice makes perfect, so you just have to try these techniques that I've shown you, and in the end, I suppose, you'll learn it and you'll be able to paint your own Christmas trees, Christmas cards, paintings with a lot of these spruce trees. Okay, and don't forget the book. Okay, hi.